Oh, hey nerds! Didn't see you come in there. I was just admiring my Minerva.
I remember days of light and laughter.
Okay, that's a little bleak. I'm just gonna scooch on out of there. Anyways, hope you're all doing well. And we're here to talk about one thing that I constantly get asked about, and I figured I'd give a brief overview about. We're not going to go too deep into it, but this is the question I often get. Hey, sages, or more often than not, hey, annoying dude, what skill should I give blank? And usually, it's followed by an expletive, maybe an insult to my mother, and if I don't see any of these comments on my, this video, I'm going to be pretty upset considering, so get on that, friends. Anyways, let's talk about this because it is a valid question and something that I get asked quite a bit when it comes down to it. And I'm going to say when it comes down to it, a lot. So, first off and foremost, when we talk about special skills, we talk about these, of course, the C skills. These, trigger after every so many actions, varies from 2 to 5, maybe even 6. And usually, these can turn the tide of battle pretty quickly if you use them well and if you come equipped well. But a lot of people don't really know what the current meta is or why certain abilities are better than most. So I'm just going to talk about certain skills and usually the general rule of thumb that I go with when, picking certain skills for my characters, okay? Alright, so first off and foremost, we're going to take a look at Minerva here and we're going to talk about a few things. Also, just so we're clear, we're leaving out staff users because, well, their special skills are different for obvious reasons. And 2, I'm not going to be talking about the AoE special skills because that's a hell of a lot of math to deal with, and also they have very long charge times, which is something we need to address. So, first off and foremost, I'm going to talk about, well, actually, you know what, we'll talk about that. Right now, the current meta is basically getting in and killing your team, you're not your team, your enemy team, and it's all about being as quick as possible and as efficient as possible, which means generally right now, when it comes to building as a unit, you want to avoid cooldowns, and usually you want to avoid large cooldowns. Mostly, something like Aether here, you generally won't see in an arena, because it's slow, and while it's, it's powerful, if you have a speedy enough unit, or even a slow unit, you'll trigger these smaller abilities off much quicker, and your damage will typically be higher in the long run. Also, I'm just going to mention right now that as it is with the meta, usually you will not be seeing things like Holy Vestments or Sacred Cowl in there as well, because while they're great abilities, usually, if you're going to die, you're probably not going to be, saved by these, usually. Especially if you're, going up against Hectors and things. Oh, God. But no, that's just a joke. Still, nonetheless, things like Noontime, things like Soul, these are all pretty neat abilities that give you sustain, but if you really, really want to build around the whole meta of being the most efficient at damage, you'll typically want to avoid them. Not because they're not good, but mostly because in Arena, sustain doesn't really, well, it can help, but chances are, if you're having to, rely on the sustain, you're probably going to lose in the long run, because other people will usually have better abilities. So, I'm just saying, be careful with those, okay? Still, nonetheless, let's talk about some skills that people oftentimes put on characters, and things like this. So, I'm going to talk about Reprisal and Retribution real quick. So, this is one that I see a lot of, and something that I honestly really disagree with in a lot of ways, because I'll just be pretty frank here. Retribution and Reprisal are left up to chance in most, cases. Well, almost all of them, because not only do you have to risk being damaged because they boost your damage based on the damage you've received, but also they are, negligible, they're inconsistent, and usually you can fill these slots with something better that will do a lot more damage. That's just what I believe when it comes down to it. So I usually avoid Retribution and Reprisal, mostly because, well, I can't take it. So, next up, I'm also going to talk about Night Sky and Glimmer, and I'm going to be pretty frank here. Night Sky and Glimmer, you should entirely avoid. Avoid it. Avoid it. And I mean this because, as a skill, when it comes down to it, they are, they can do a lot of damage. But the thing is, typically, Night Sky and Glimmer do better against units you're usually already winning against. Units you have, advantage over with attack, or, something like that. So generally, Night Sky and Glimmer are only for really making units deader than they would be, if that makes any sense. You can't really rely too much on this to get you out of a pinch. Sure, they'll add in some additional damage, but the skill slot will be better provided for, better to provide to a different skill that will boost their skills and, their stats, or rely on them more. To give you an example, I'm going to show you my Minerva, who I feel is a bit better and a bit more fully fleshed out here when it comes down to it. Granted, I'm not too happy with Vantage 3, but I was going to give her something else like Quick Repost, but I just couldn't find a team. Couldn't find a unit I could actually do with that right now, so anyways, that's kind of my whole spiel with Minerva here, okay? So we'll talk about Moonbow in a second because people love giving this ability to other characters, and I'll give you a good case as to why you might want to do that or why you might not want to. So first off and foremost, this is, as you can see here, I kind of messed around a lot with my Minerva. Got her Dragon Gaze, Draconic Aura, and Moonbow and New Moon. So, yeah. Basically, Draconic Aura is probably the go-to ability when it comes to my special skills for Minerva. And the reason I say this is because Draconic Aura is, well, it doesn't really say it correctly. This is a mistranslation here in a sense. But basically, it takes 30% of her attack stat and then adds that to her damage, which for her is 50, so it's a pretty substantial increase, and that will do more damage than, say, Moonbow, or something like that. And that's the general rule of thumb when it comes to building right now, at least for me, at least when it comes to special skills, outside of, say, niche builds like Fury builds and things like that. So, to give you an idea, I'll also just give you, Lucas here. Lucas here is mostly based around defense. That's actually one of his highest stats, and it will be even higher, but unfortunately mine is level 32 because I am lazy. He also has Fortress Defense 3, which does help that out. Now, to offset this, and also because he has a Killer Lance, we'll go over that in a bit. I gave him Bonfire and Ignis. These are both really, really good abilities that basically, as you can read here, 50% of units defense and 80% of units defense. That is a substantial increase when you take his defense stat into play. And that is basically how I say you should build. If you see a character who has high attack, you generally want to go with Draconic Aura because that will usually provide more of a big flux in damage for them when they actually activate it. See a unit with good defense? Well, then go with Ignis, Bonfire, usually Bonfire. If your character has a bit more, resistance, I think we have Niles here somewhere as an example I can give you. Let's just see here. There you are, Niles. No, not Klein, not Calvin Klein, thank you. Chilling Wind, I believe that turns into Iceberg. Yes, Iceberg. And that's essentially the same thing as Bonfire, just instead of defense, it's resistance. And usually, with that kind of ability, since Niles, I believe, actually has a pretty decent enough resistance, that damage will be spiked because of it. And right now, that's basically the current meta when it really comes together. And I was about to say when it comes down to it, because, but still, that's the general rule of thumb. Yes, you could go with higher tier abilities like Luna and things like that, which we need to talk about that as well. So, now that I'm reminded of it. So one thing that people oftentimes suggest when it comes down to it is Moonbow. And I'm going to be pretty honest here, Moonbow is a great ability, but it's not something that's end-all be-all, okay? Moonbow is substantially useful, but I'll give you an example of why it's useful in its own right, okay? Minerva is not the best example for, Moonbow, but let's say her attack was substantially less for some reason. Maybe, she didn't have life or death, or maybe she wasn't meant to be this huge, heavy hitter, and instead more like a tank that had some speed. Then, and let's say, she had more speed than normal, or, I can't really think of a good character right now that can use Moonbow effectively that I actually use in my main rotation, but still, let's say that for some reason, her attack was less and her speed was much higher, and that was her main stat. Right now, we don't really have an ability that really works off of speed too well, outside of, say, Moonbow. And the reason why that is because, well, Moonbow, to give you an example, it can trigger off every 2 turns. That's a very fast thing, and if your character can double that means it's going to be firing off constantly. That's an additional boost to damage, and since your character is, well, you know, to give you an example, let's see if I can't find Moonbow. I think I have an Odin somewhere down here. Because Moonbow, it negates, I believe, 30% of the opponent's defense. It acts like that attack basically ignored it. And that's Donald, that's not what I wanted. Whoa! Whoa, I'm crazy. Okay, let's just, anyways, load up. Thank you. Oh boy, Odin. Put some pants on. Still, here is New Moon and Moonbow. You get the basic example, but it resolves the conflict as if the, you know, the foe suffered 30% less, you know, defense and resistance, which means that characters that have less of an attack stat will have a bit more of an advantage with Moonbow, because if they're speedy enough, they can trigger it constantly. That means they'll be getting an additional boost to damage, and hopefully negating some of that defense that they would have to overcome to do more damage, which is definitely something that's very useful for speedier characters. So, you know, if you have a character who has quite a bit of speed, but, you know, may be a bit lacking on attack, or say another stat, you could definitely equip Moonbow to that. And that's generally how I go with the rule of thumb, is if they have a decent enough stat, you know, resistance, defense, attack, you usually want to go with something like Draconic Aura, something that will be really good. Usually, I would like their abilities to be over 40, 45 in those stats to be able to effectively use that. And if you can't get that and they're fast instead, go with Moonbow. And if you can't do that, well, try a different ability. And I mean, even if you can't, you know, get those special skills, you can always just equip Moonbow, I guess. Or something else. Noontime, Astra, they all will do damage, but the most effective and efficient, you know, skills right now are the low cooldowns with the effective skill increment. Basically, your Bonfires, your Icebergs, your Draconic Auras, or, you know, if you don't have someone who can, you know, effectively use that, your Moonbows with speed units who can double. It also does help if you, like, for instance, Ike has Luna here. Just to give you an example, Luna is an upgrade version of Moonbow. It's 50, and, you know, 50 resistance and defense instead of, you know, 30. And that is very, very nice to have, especially if you have a unit that has a weapon that can reduce that, or perhaps, you know, a unit that has something like maybe a brave weapon, you know, something that allows them to attack twice without having to worry about consequences of speed. Then you could probably use something like Luna as well. It will boost their damage even more, you know, making them a much more effective, you know, character in the long run. But chances are, Moonbow may do a bit more damage if they're speedy enough. I'm just saying, that's usually how it goes. And that's my general rule of thumb when it comes to selecting abilities, is go with the stat that they have the highest. If it's speed, Moonbow is always great. If they have, you know, attack, defense, resistance, these are all really good abilities. You know, Draconic Aura, you know, Bonfire, Ignis, you know, if they have certain skills, certain weapons, you usually want to go with those. It will boost their damage substantially, and it will probably turn the tide of war for you. Especially if you're going up against, you know, a different color that they're weak against. My Minerva can routinely take out reds pretty reliably, and that's always fun. That's just, you know, my idea, guys. I know people are probably like, what? Oh, well, if you disagree with me, that's fine. I mean, there's always good abilities out there, too. I just figured I'd give you a brief, you know, like, little look into it and see what you guys think. So, that's just my idea, and that's pretty much my consensus when it comes to special skills, is go with the stat you need. And also, if they're speedy and they have, you know, certain stats in other fields, it's always good to look into it. Consider your options, you know, again, defense, Bonfire, you know, resistance, Iceberg, attack, Draconic Aura. Those are the good abilities right now. Moonbow and Draconic Aura are probably some of the most overused abilities right now, and there's a reason for it. They are incredibly powerful. And that's just what I have to say. So, build effectively, build efficiently, and hopefully you will have a great team with your special skills. And, yeah, that's all I gotta say, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.